Welcome to the Legal Defense Fund's post-election town hall. This discussion is intended to provide general information. LDF is not providing legal advice. Thank you for joining us.
Well, welcome to Position Your Power. It's good to be here in the office with you in New York, having this conversation with you.
Yes, so important. So important.
It is. It really is. A lot's been going on right now. A lot is going on right now.
That's right.
So here we go.
Here we go. So I know many people are tuning in because we've gotten so many questions about the way forward after we got the results of the election nearly 2.5 weeks ago. And it's a valid question because the future feels very uncertain. It feels dismaying. It feels daunting to be facing all the challenges that we are in this moment. So we wanted to bring everyone into conversation about how LDF is seeing our way forward and what we had planned in advance, because we did a lot of planning, a lot of scenario planning, as you well know, Demetria, to make sure that we took account of every possibility, including the one that we're facing right now. And we are continuing to analyze the results of the election, but there are some things that we know for sure. And that is that we have faced setbacks before. We have faced what seems like intractable problems, and particularly those facing and confronting Black communities. And yet we have progressed, we have resisted, we have disrupted, and we have dared to dream bigger. And that's what we plan to do in this moment as well. So I'm really excited to be in conversation with you in particular, because we will continue to do a lot of litigation work, less probably at the federal level, more probably at the state and local levels. But we're also going to be ramping up our policy work. And Demetria, as the director of policy, and newly minted director at that.
What a time, what a time.
What a time, what a time. The expertise that you bring to this work and the strategy that you've already given the institution in terms of our way forward has been just invaluable. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation.
Thank you. Well, it is a time. It is a time. And the policy team, we are thinking collaboratively. Of course, we're thinking with our litigation team as well. But some of the other work that we've been doing before the election included a focus on state level work, right? And your own vision about working on voting rights at the state level. So critical. I mean, we are still pressing at the federal policy level for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Freedom Vote Act, all of the suites of acts and bills that we want to see adopted. But in the meantime, it's also important that we make sure that we ensure Black political power for voting and doing that at the state level. So we have had really good results in some of the states where we've been working, and we're still pushing in more states to get some of that work done. Michigan is a great example that we're pushing for. And so when we look at our other pillars, economic justice, the criminal legal system, things that relate to education equity, we're looking at doing state work as well, because people live in states.
That's right.
And then there's the DC. We got to get DC statehood. And so it's important that we do that kind of work. And so we're doing scenario planning. We're trying to actualize some of those plans now. So that's what we're looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to digging into that work more deeply, but also recognizing that we've got some real challenges. There's no mincing words about that.
Yep.
We are facing some dire and significant threats. And I'm delighted that we were built for these types of moments. And I am drawing in particular on the history of LDF at this time. When I think back to nearly 85 years ago, because we'll be 85 years old, years young, next year. And I think about the fact that the intrepid lawyers who founded LDF had to envision a future and an ability to use law to transform society, even though it defied logic. Right? It defied everything that they could see in their vision, but they saw a way through in the same way that we're seeing a way through now. And we've got a lot more tools in our arsenal than we did back then. We have the ability to not only use courts, but to use policy, state and local advocacy. We have organizers. We have a research arm. So I feel that we have, along with our formidable communications and narrative shaping team, the right resources to meet this moment, especially as we think about how we lost ground in this moment and what some of the forces were that were responsible for that.
I agree. I mean, if you think about the tools that they used then and the tools we have now, It's shame on us if we don't use them.
That's right. Shame on us.
Shame on us.
And we can't lose sight of the wins. So I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about some of the wins that we actually saw in this past election, and then diagnose what happened in the past election. So let's begin the conversation.
All right, sounds good to me. So let's see here. I believe that we've received some questions.
We did.
In advance. So I'm going to take a look at those. And so we've got several questions here about how LDF will position itself under the new administration. You ready for that, Janai?
Sure.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's see. Who do we have first here? Michelle. So Michelle asked, what will change for LDF in this new administration? What's
so
going
much
to change?
So much will change. I'll start by saying some things will stay the same. There is some work that we will do that we will continue, that I think will fly under the radar, and that we can continue to pursue the course that we have already been on. But a significant amount of our work, particularly in federal government, is going to change because we will not have a friendly or hospitable partner. But I do want to make one thing clear about this election that I think is often lost in the conversation, and that is, we knew that no matter the outcome of the election, that the rise in right Christian nationalism across the country was going to be a challenge and a threat, a pregnant threat for Black communities to confront, no matter who was in the White House, right? No matter who had control of Congress. And so we've prepared for that outcome and the expectation that we would still have to combat this. However, we now no longer have a partner in government. And LDF is nonpartisan, so whoever's in the Oval Office, whoever's in the administration, we are going to push them and push them to do more and more and more. We now will be facing even more headwinds to do that. And so that will change, right? I doubt that I'll be at the White House as often as I was in the previous administration. You know how that goes. And engaging with at the new agencies in the administration in exactly the same way. But we will still be pushing even this Trump administration to follow the rule of law. We will ask them to be held to account under the Senate confirmation rules, which is the most immediate battle. I know people have already raised concerns about the unfitness, the absolute unfitness of some of the individuals who have been named as potential confirmed people to lead
cabinet members.
Yeah, to lead the most important agencies of this country.
Heartbeats away.
Heartbeats away. So we know that we are going to have to not allow these new assaults to be normalized, no matter how routine they've become, no matter how accustomed we are to this abnormality. We can't normalize it. We have to constantly hold the line and recognize when it's a problem. So that's something new that we'll be doing. We'll also be engaging more with local community partners to make sure that we assure their well-being, their protection, because we know that the government can be weaponized against our communities quite easily. So we're going to continue to develop our relationships on the ground, our grassroots connections through our organizing department. We will continue to produce groundbreaking research because there's an assault on truth. There's an assault on data. So that's going to be even more important than ever for us to make sure that we document what's happening to Black communities and that we provide the data and statistics to support it. And then, of course, we will litigate as we always have done, and we will do our policy advocacy as well.
That's a really good point. I was just speaking to a group of Black parents at a conference today in Atlanta, and it's wonderful that Black parents get together. And so being there for those community members who are still dealing with things on a local level, that's super important. So I'm glad.
It's very important.
I was there as well as our team member from the policy team. So it's good. So let me go on to the next question. Similarly, a number of folks also want to know what creative or new strategies LDF will be implementing. So Mary asks, we are living in a very new day where old school tactics and strategies may not be effective. What creative and researched plans of engagement do you anticipate employing now and in the future?
So, Mary, that is the question of the hour, and I'm glad that we have already given that a lot of thought. While I'm not going to get into specifics here because some of that is under development, and certainly part of the effectiveness of these strategies is not necessarily broadcasting them so that they could be thwarted. But we are already, as I said earlier, deploying new ideas about how to leverage data and technology, both for efficiencies, also for the purpose of ensuring that our messages can get out and we can scale them to a wider audience. Messaging, narrative, getting into the minds of voters and having them appreciate what this moment means for them is going to be critically important. We're also looking to forge new alliances. We have always at LDF been coalitional in our approach to work. LDF has been a leader and a convener, but we also work in coalition and in collaboration with a lot of organizations. So we will continue to do that, and we will do that in ways that may seem interesting to some. We have also gained a lot of ground by having strange bedfellows at times. And this is one of those times where we have to be both pragmatic and bring radical ideas to the table. And some of that pragmatism may be around joining arms with people across ideological group of people who can at least coalesce around the idea of preserving our democracy. And we've had a lot of success doing that in the voting rights and election protection arena. And then finally, again, at the state and local levels, you know, it was back in 1932 that Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said that states are laboratories of democracy. And we've always leaned into that idea of innovation at the state and local level. And that mandate is more important than ever in this moment for us to use states where we have inroads, where we have governors and state attorneys general and mayors and others who have this shared vision that we have for a multiracial democracy, to work with them to begin to incubate new ideas that I hope we can expand and seed in the future.
I know they say all politics are local.
That's right. All politics are local. There's no question about that. And they have more of an effect and impact on our day-to-day lives than I think people appreciate. I'll say one more thing, Demetria, that I think is critically important that I saw show up a lot in this election, and that is a lack of understanding of what the executive branch can do versus the legislative branch versus the judicial branch, and then, of course, state and local power. So we will continue to educate our communities about those distinctions so that they can leverage their political power effectively and incisively with the right actor.
And when you say communities, I mean, you're really talking about various generations, right?
Of course. Of course. All right.
So Anna here asks, how do we best use existing resources now to stop, slightly different question, to stop the imminent destruction of our freedom?
So Anna asks the right question for this moment. As you well know, we have been actively engaged with the Biden administration, which still has a little under 2 months left to do some critical work, really critical work, particularly in our judiciary. So there are 47 open positions in our federal judiciary that this administration could fill. We know that time is not on our side. And so we have been pushing. There are 15 nominees as we speak who are ready to go, who are teed up, and we have pushed our Senate to confirm them immediately. President Biden has already done an exceptional job in nominating and having confirmed the most diverse set of judicial nominees in the history of this country. He's up to about 218 judges. And we know in the first Trump administration, he was able to confirm 234 judges. So we have some catching up to do. We need to leave no open seat if we can help it.
Not one
on the federal judiciary, because we know that the courts are what have held the line in many instances when there's been overreach by the executive and when Congress has, tried to enact legislation that is not for the benefit of most Americans and not even advancing their interests or the sentiments that they hold. So the courts are the backstop. And we need to make sure that they are filled with people from diverse backgrounds and qualified people, because we've seen what the unqualified judges, many of whom were appointed and nominated by Trump, have already done.
Slightly different question for you, Janai.
Yes.
We've got one for Norbert here. Asks, what can be done to preemptively to blunt expected assaults on civil rights protections? So on that front end.
Yeah, so that's another variation of the type of preparation that we're doing. So I appreciate Norbert raising that. One of the things that we are going to lean into is all of the lessons that we learned from the first Trump administration. At the time that uh, a new administration came in, we were already suing Trump for an executive order that aimed at ending diversity, equity, and inclusion and any minority contracting and any way for the federal government to acknowledge past discrimination and to remedy it. That was Executive Order 13950. We had advanced the ball in that case. We also were working in partnership with Lambda Legal Defense Fund, who had another case to complement ours. And there was a nationwide injunction against that executive order. We still have that complaint. We still have our
Dust it off.
we still
Dust
have
it
all
off.
of that.
Dust it off.
It's not only dusted off, it is updated, it is reinforced with new arguments. And we know that on the first day of this second Trump administration, we are expecting a flurry of executive orders,
absolutely.
hostile executive orders, and we are
sure.
prepared to litigate those directly and to meet them in court with the equal force that is required to beat those down.
That's great. That's great. That's great. Katie's got a question for us. So Katie asked, minorities across the board will be targets of this administration. Do you expect to partner with LGBTQ plus I organizations to ensure equality for all? And I think you somewhat just
Yeah, but I'll say a little
that.
bit more because again, these assaults are not new. They didn't just start on November 5th. We've been dealing with this for quite some time. If you recall, the decision out of the Supreme Court last term that effectively put an end to affirmative action, or at least how it's been traditionally used in higher education in the SFFA versus Harvard and versus UNC case. That was a deep assault on the ability to have access to higher education, especially for traditionally excluded groups and for Black communities specifically. And what we did in response at LDF is we launched an equal protection initiative, which looks at the 14th Amendment rather expansively and is trying to not only bring litigation to ensure that we are enforcing our civil rights laws as aggressively as possible to remedy discrimination, but also trying to revisit the idea of merit. Who deserves an education?
Right.
What does it mean to say that I have actual equal access to education at the K through 12 level or in higher education? And one of the other features of our Equal Protection Initiative is what we're calling the Advancing Racial Equity Alliance, because we felt it so important to make sure that we locked arms with other organizations and other constituencies that were impacted, especially those that many attempt to divide us from. So one of the first partners we reached out to was Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which is a wonderful legal organization similar to LDF, but protecting and advancing the rights of Asian Americans. We reached out to the National Women's Law Center. We reached out to Latino Justice. And we reached out to the National Center for Lesbian Rights, which represents all LGBTQ plus people, because we thought it would be a critical show of force to show that all of us are exactly, there's no daylight between how we are seeing this assault on affirmative action and what it means for each of our communities.
You mentioned the Equal Protection Initiative. There are other initiatives as well. Before I get to the next question, you want to talk about a little bit about some of the other initiatives we have going?
Yes, we have a pro-truth initiative that is about 3 to 4 years old at this point, because again, the assault on truth, the assault on books and curricula in this country is not a new invention. It's something that has been going on for the past several years. And I've always referred to it as a trifecta of assaults. We see the assault on information and truth. We see the assault on voting rights and democracy, which is through the right to vote. And then we see the assault on protest. And when you look at those interlocking forces, what that does is it effectively says, there's no way for you to dissent. We're not going to allow you to get an education to be informed enough to dissent. We're going to block your right to vote so that you can't use that power to unelect people who aren't serving you. And then you can't protest. So LDF is on all of those fronts. None of the above, but yeah, we are fighting all of the above because we can't allow for those barriers to nonviolent change in this country to be closed off to our communities. And we won't stand for that. We've had some great successes in beating back, for example, the law out of Florida that attempted to criminalize protest. And we were able to win in that case. We have been beating back.
People have been criminalizing protests
forever, because they're afraid of protest. They're afraid of protest because protest leads to change.
Yeah.
And we know that voting can lead to change when organized enough. So those are some of the vehicles that we'll continue to fight for.
Okay. All right, Cliff. Okay, Cliff made it to the board. So Cliff asks, how can LDF reach out to folks who feel threatened by LDF initiatives, those who flock to candidate Trump?
So that's a question that often comes up. How are we building bridges? How are we doing outreach to communities that may not see themselves aligned with the interests of Black communities? And some of that comes through education by unpacking some of the false narratives of division, which we're doing through our communications, which we do just in the outreach that we've done, over the years. We have engaged with what some might deem conservative groups around issues of common interest. We have engaged with folks, as I mentioned, leading into the election and even now, about safeguarding our democracy. We don't agree on social issues. We don't agree on certain economic issues, but we agree that we need a democracy in order to advance any of them.
Yeah.
I need a democracy. They need a democracy. We all need a democracy in order to be able to advance our interests, to engage in the difficult negotiation and compromise that a democracy requires.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go to Sarah now. And Sarah asks, what are you doing to get more judges approved by the Biden administration before the new Congress takes over? So if you want to get a little more granular.
Yes. So what we're doing is, one, we're identifying the judges that we think need to be moved as quickly as possible based on the circuit or the district court location that they will occupy. So, for example, if we see an area where there's inadequate representation of any group and there's a lack of diversity, we are pushing those nominees first and foremost. Of course, we're saying everybody needs to get through, but we're saying in terms of prioritization, we need to bring more diversity to certain benches. There are some benches where the balance between whether it would tip more liberal or conservative in terms of ideology is really hanging in the balance. And if we can get a judge advanced to tip it in favor of a bench that might be more open and hospitable to protecting constitutional and civil rights, that will now be a priority.
So LDF has targeted states, 7 targeted states in the South that we often usually focus on. But there are certain circuits that cover those certain states. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, the circuits that cover the southern states, most notably the 5th Circuit, they receive a lot of the complaints that we bring because those are some of the most problematic areas. Right now, we have a Supreme Court case that we'll be litigating this term that emanates from the state of Louisiana, right? It is a outgrowth of the win that we had a couple of years ago in the state of Alabama, where we got a second Black Opportunity District in Congress. And I'm delighted to say that it performed this election. And Black Alabamians now have a second Black representative in Congress that they elected, who is their candidate of choice. And as a consequence, we got a second Black Opportunity District in Louisiana. That is the one that's being challenged and that we're going to defend in the Supreme Court. So that's just one example of why judges are so important, because we need judges who are going to be fair-minded when they hear these arguments, who don't already have their minds made up about who should have power and who shouldn't, about whether it is important to have interventions to allow Black people, Asians, Latin American people to be able to exercise their power, even if they are a numerical minority. And of course, we know that the demographics are changing, with lightning speed.
Yeah. So some of those judges being appointed, nominated, I should say, we're looking at the 11th Circuit, Fourth Circuit, Sixth Circuit, all those southern
Yep,
states
yep.
are super critical.
Critical.
Yeah. Thank you for going further with that. Susan. So Susan asks, does the attack on so-called woke generals and the appointment of a government efficiency czar bring to mind the purging of Black employees from the civil service under President Woodrow Wilson?
Absolutely. So, thank you, Susan, for that historical reference. As we know, the past is never past, especially when you don't fix it or reckon with it. So we know that a lot of this is cyclical. So President Woodrow Wilson, back in 1940, came into power because Black people voted in large numbers for the first time for this Democrat. At the time, what was then the Republican Party, does not resemble the current Republican Party. Black people tended to vote more for Republicans, but this was the very first presidential election where we did otherwise, thinking that President Woodrow Wilson would deliver on election promises and would try to advance the interests of Black people. What he did when he got into office is he segregated the federal government that had previously been integrated in terms of how it worked and its personnel. He literally segregated the federal government. That led to a decrease in leadership positions in the federal government, which was a decrease in income, which is a decrease in power, and a decrease in influence. And what President Trump has promised through Project 2025, at the advice of Ben Carson, is that, yes, your head should drop. What President Trump has promised is to lay off those people in the federal government who do not support him politically or who did not share his same ideology. And I think we have to step back and think about why Black people have flocked to the federal government for employment in the first place. And that has been because there's guaranteed protections in federal government due to federal law that we've all fought for, the civil rights that protect all federal workers and all workers, but certainly in the federal government, there are greater protections, there are usually better benefits, there's more job security, and that has allowed Black communities to thrive in different pockets of our country, and especially if we look at the DMV area, Delaware, Maryland, and DC,
Yes.
That area of the country has the largest population of Black wealth. Black wealthy people.
Yeah.
And so the idea that if you lay off federal government workers who are 18% Black, greater than our numbers in the population at around 13%, 18% Black, we know that that will have a devastating impact on the wealth, livelihood, and well-being, home ownership, intergenerational wealth of Black people, especially in that area of the country.
See, now I had heard about the fact that a lot of federal jobs were moved to regional offices and field offices because there were too many Black people occupying federal jobs here in DC, but I was not aware of what you just shared.
Yeah, no, well, that's another way of extracting Black talent and diffusing it, and in some cases, demoting folks in a way where they can no longer hold the power that they do. So that is something that we have our eyes on. We are deeply concerned about the impact of that and are already researching and investigating ways to combat it, especially if it has a racially disparate impact, which we expect it will, given the numbers of Black people in federal government. That is something that we will attack.
You referenced Project 2025.
Yes.
So hopefully folks have read LDFs.
All 900 pages? No.
LDF's analysis of Project 2025.
Yes.
But do you want to share a bit about some of LDF's analysis about Project 2025?
Yeah, it's a body of work that I'm very proud of because we put this out well in advance of the election so that people understood what was on the ballot. And we didn't just insert ourselves into the broad conversation about Project 2025. We wanted to look specifically at how does Project 2025 impact Black communities specifically. And one of the areas we looked at was this issue of federal government employment and what a disproportionate impact it would have. The other concerns we have range from imposition of the death penalty, which we know has serious racially disparate consequences.
Absolutely.
We know that Black people are more likely to be convicted and sentenced to the death penalty than any other group, especially when there's a white victim. We know that Black people often are convicted by all white juries or juries that have been infected with racial bias and discrimination. So we know that these sentences are often not just, and sometimes they can even involve innocent human beings. So we are deeply concerned about the imposition of the death penalty. That is something else that we are lobbying President Biden to do in this moment, and that is to commute the death sentences of all 40 individuals on federal death row. So that's something that, we're asking everyone who's engaged in these issues and who wants to do something specific to call their congressperson about some of the laws we mentioned, to, call the White House and ask that President Biden commute the sentences, not only of the 40 on death row, but there are many other people who have been imprisoned under draconian sentencing laws that are no longer in existence, but they are still imprisoned under laws that we have now saw fit to realize were discriminatory and harmful and should never have been in place. Those individuals deserve freedom. They deserve a chance to rehabilitate themselves and their lives.
This is life or death work.
Yes, it is.
All right. Next, we've got Kashonda. So Kashonda asks, what impacts, both socially and legislatively, such as Bill H.R. 9495, what impacts can we anticipate with the incoming administration that may impact work we do in corporate, social justice, DEI, philanthropic spaces? Woo! HR 9495. Oh my goodness, that's a loaded one.
I love it. Kashonda has her her finger on the pulse
existential
of what's happening. Absolutely, absolutely. So for those who don't know, HR 9495 is a bill that will be voted on tomorrow. Tomorrow. And it is a bill called the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalty for American Hostages Act. So if you hear that, you may say, of course, we all want to stop terror. We all want to stop tax penalties on hostages. But what people don't realize is that there's a section in that bill that is devoted to nonprofits like the Legal Defense Fund, like all of our colleagues in the field. And that provision gives unfettered discretion to the Treasury Secretary to designate any organization like LDF that's been around for 85 years and to say that you are a terror supporting organization based on no evidence,
none,
with no due process. And that would invite not only scrutiny from the government, but perhaps even the revocation of our 501c3 status. And it's not just us. If you care about anything from the the NAACP to the ASPCA to the Legal Defense Fund, you should be deeply frightened by this bill. And so we are pushing back against it. Yes. We've engaged in advocacy online. As you know, your team drafted a letter that's going out today.
Yeah.
So we are we are really trained on these types of legislative assaults. And then, of course, I talked about the executive orders, which we think will come swiftly as soon as President-elect Trump gains office.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. That's really huge. So thank you for that question, Kashonda. I'm having nightmares about this. All right. So we've got Kimberly. Kimberly asks, due to Trump's appointments on the federal benches in his first term, can we realistically expect to have any true recourse in the courts?
I think that is a fair question. I understand exactly where it's coming from. I understand the skepticism, and I share some of it. What I will say, though, is that if we think back to 2020, when there was an attempt to steal an American election, and then former President Trump brought about 61 lawsuits in federal courts across the country trying to challenge the election results. I think it was 59 or 60 out of the 61 got booted out of court. They didn't make it far enough for there to be any trial or litigation. You don't even hear about them because they were frivolous, they were baseless, and judges, even some of whom were appointed and nominated by him, said no. This is where it stops. This is where we have to step in and hold firm to our oath to the Constitution and to be objective and impartial arbiters of the law,
Mhm.
and we will continue to expect that of our judiciary, to hold them to account. Of course, we know that we've seen some activity of some judges where I question their judgment and their intentions. However, I would like to believe that the better part of the federal judiciary, especially if we succeed in getting these additional pending judges in the bench,
So important. So
in the
important.
pipeline and on the bench, if we get them there, I expect that our federal judiciary will hold the line. And trust me when I tell you that LDF will press them to do so.
Yeah, we're working on that daily.
That's right.
All right, John. John's on the board here. John asks, throughout history, the courts have served as a vital firewall for civil rights. In this current landscape, how do you see the courts being helpful in advancing civil rights?
Yeah, so that's a different spin on the earlier question, and it's about what can courts do. And I will point to, again, some of the wins that we've experienced, even in what we all know is a challenging Supreme Court. So we won a congressional district, as I said, in the state of Alabama. That was in this same Supreme Court that struck down reproductive justice, that denied a district that we were fighting for last term in South Carolina. So it's not necessarily that we can say we can rely on the right outcome in all instances. In most instances, we're very skeptical. But there are times when the violation of law is so clear, the record that we've built is so powerful, our advocacy is so on point that it leaves no room for a court to maintain its credibility and rule against us. And that's the type of intensity and excellence we have to bring to the work, to leave no quarter for any court to say with credibility that you are not entitled to the justice that you are demanding.
So our litigators aren't packing up their suitcases.
Not at all.
To go
Not
on
at
vacation
all.
right now, right?
They're sharpening their tools is what they're doing. Yes, they're sharpening their tools.
All right, so let's see here. Yvonne. Yvonne asks, what role can and should grassroots organizing play in this current landscape? There's a second part. Hold on. Is that a part of LDF's calculation? Grassroots organizing.
It absolutely is. And it always has been. And I think that organizing has become a much more recognized profession within the civil rights ecosystem than it was before. So even when we litigated Brown versus Board of Education and won in 1954, 70 years ago, we're celebrating that case milestone this year. We knew that we needed organizers on the ground to ensure that once we broke down the doctrine of separate but equal and that schools had to integrate across the South, that we needed people who would be on the ground working with families, ensuring that they could have a strategy for bringing their children into a hostile environment, for continuing to build on this litigation win. And similarly today, when we win a case, we are usually going into the case from the beginning with some engagement with communities to understand what the needs are and to make sure that if we are victorious, that those individuals who are local and who will feel the greatest impact are prepared to carry that win forward and make sure that we get the full breadth and scope of that victory.
And there's a third part to this question, which I find interesting, because the third part to this person's question which is Yvonne. Yvonne also asks, what work has your organizing team been doing to prepare for what's to come? And I got to say, who's in the building today?
Who's in our conference room today? Yes. They are literally plotting and scheming as we speak, which,
so ironic.
Which is great. That's right. It is. The timing is perfect. Well, one of the things that we wanted to make sure of from the very beginning is that organizations that don't have the same resources. Now, LDF is always looking for more resources. We are still under-resourced, to be clear. But there are organizations that are out there on the ground, local, doing the work, who are less resourced than we are. And so what we've done through our approach to organizing is to bring a sort of train the trainer mentality and to make sure that we are a resource as our organizing team is a resource to organizers in local and grassroots organizations. Just last year, we had a first of its kind organizers conference that LDF led and brought in organizers from across the South, where most Black people live, to work together, to collaborate, to have a space for, authentic engagement. And it's something that we want to continue to carry forward. So not only are we sharing our knowledge and our learnings with our local partners and our grassroots partners, but we're also deeply engaged with them on the ground and making sure that, they aren't in harm's way as we face a hostile federal government.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so important that LDF is not an organization just kind of helicopters in.
No.
With like the Superman cape or anything like that. So that's really important.
And we have our office in Atlanta, where you just came from,
just
right? So
yeah.
LDF, just a little over a year ago, we opened our Southern Regional office. And it's not the first time LDF has had an office in the South. We've had offices before in Mississippi and elsewhere. But there, now we have a presence on the ground in Georgia, in Atlanta. It serves as an outpost for all of our Southern activity. And so I think that is important to just demonstrate our literal footprint and investment in the South and commitment there, as always.
Yeah. All right, Tanya. Tanya asks, what tools in education will LDF be turning to? Talk to us about the curricula LDF has created.
Tanya, thank you for that. So this is a perfect segue from the conversation I just had about Brown and us celebrating the 70th anniversary. So one of the things we did as part of that commemoration of this historic case that transformed America, transformed it completely.
Transformed my life.
Yes, and everyone's life. No matter your color, race, background, ethnicity, you have been impacted by Brown, which is why we say we are all Brown by virtue of that case. So one of the things that we did in celebration of the case is we created a curriculum, and we have piloted this curriculum with the Philadelphia School District. And it's geared towards middle schoolers at the upper level and high schoolers. It walks you through week by week how you can engage young people to understand this important case, to understand the legal system, to understand the role of clients and organizers and courts and judges in transforming society. And it's a bit of a history lesson, right? It tells you what
at a time when people don't want to talk about Black history.
They don't want to talk about Black history. They don't want to talk about American history, right? Because that's what that is. And so this curriculum is out there, and I think it's more important than ever as we see the assault on education, and in particular, again, Project 2025 has promised that this new administration will dismantle the Federal Department of Education. I know just yesterday we heard about the cabinet appointee for the Department of Education, but I don't know whether the department is going to last long based on the predictions I've heard and based on what I've read in Project 2025.
Yeah, like I said, I just came this morning from an education conference, Black educators to be more specific, and there was a career staffer there from the Department of Ed who literally said at that conference in the session where we were, "I'm not sure if I will be here at your next conference."
Yeah, it is a horrific thought to think that a country that has so much promise is sending the message to every resident in this country that education is devalued because we do not want to invest in a federal apparatus that can make sure that there's equal access, that there's national standards, that there is someone in charge of ensuring that we continue to advance and lead in the world. And by dismantling the Department of Education, we are opening ourselves up to a tremendous setback as a nation. But of course, LDF is never going to take its foot off the gas on education. That is at our core. I mean, it's part of our name. It is who we are. So we already have thoughts about ways in which, even if we have to deal with a climate of school choice, which is something that we all should be clear about, is a direct attack on the funding of public education. Even if we're forced to deal with a regime of school choice, we want to make sure that there are alternatives and schools, homeschooling options, and other options that will ensure that the next generation of Black children have a fair, culturally accurate, informed, and rigorous, critical analytical education, because that's what it's going to take in order for us to get out of this threat.
Which just really shows the import of the parallel tracks that were going on as far as federal work as well as work in the states.
That's right. That's
Particularly
exactly
those
right.
southern states. So
That's right.
all right. So David asked, LDF is supporting a new generation of civil rights attorneys through the Marshall Mutley Scholars Program. We like talking
Yes.
about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? How will the training they receive in law school and beyond support LDF's goal of elevating civil rights?
Oh, I love this question because it gets me to talk about the thing that inspires me the most in this moment. So just a few days, it was within 72 hours of the election, we had a Zoom call with our Marshall Mutley Scholars. And the Marshall Mutley Scholars, they're a set of, ultimately will be 50 individuals, 5 cohorts of 10 scholars who we have supported through law school, through fellowships, and into practice, and provided full financial support in exchange for their commitment to work in the South and advance racial justice on behalf of Black communities. And we just
wait a minute, you got to stop.
I got to pause
'cause
right there.
That's too exciting.
That's
too
right.
exciting.
That's right. Let me let that breathe for a second. Let me let that breathe. But really, it is tremendous, and I'm so excited about it because we just graduated our first class this May. They are now, those 10 individuals are now at nonprofits across the country or clerking, and being trained to be the best civil rights lawyers you can imagine. And they've been with us through their summer internships in law school. We have regular contact and engagement with them. And what we're doing is making sure that we deliver on the promise of Brown, right? That it's not just about integrating classes. No, it's about getting a quality education so that you can go out and become a social engineer, as Charles Hamilton Houston directed everyone who studied at Howard Law School, your alma mater, to go and do. And so that's what we're doing in our own way, building the next generation of social engineers. So we've got 50 of them in the pipeline. We're so proud of them. And that's what gives me hope to know that, these young people are coming behind me and they are going to do their thing.
The whole thing was, and they always ingrained it us when I was young in law school, like you're either a social engineer or a parasite
That's right.
in society.
That's what he said.
So
that's right.
So it's exciting to see those folks, those young folks. All right, Ben. Ben asked, the Black Voters on the Rise team spent the election supporting and advancing Black political power across the South. How do you see that work continuing post-election? And why is it important to have a year-long political participation strategy?
Ben, that is a brilliant question. And it allows me to talk about the silver lining. And I know people don't feel like there is one of this election, but there was a silver lining in this election, and probably more than one. But one of the things is that we really engaged voters, and not just us, many of our peers in the field. We are a founding member of the Election Protection Hotline, the 1-866 Our Vote, and many of our peers in the field were out there with us, protecting the right to vote. Some people have walked away from this election thinking that it was without incident. There were incidents. I want to be clear about that. There were ways in which we know our votes were suppressed and that there were problems at the polls. Nonetheless, we were fanned out across the 7 states that you mentioned, as we are wont to do every election, and we are there year round. And as a result of being there during primary elections, during local elections, during special elections, we have credibility in these communities, and we have been able to continue to educate voters in communities, even with the changing voting laws that have occurred. We have helped to build the muscle of active engagement. You got to check your voter registration status. You got to make sure your mail-in ballot is actually tracked and counted. So people understand that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires action. And we're there every step of the way to help people engage. And so I want to just finish by saying that's the upside. We now have voters who are engaged and ready to go. And we want to deploy that energy, that education, and that interest toward local and state elections now that the big federal election cycle is over.
And that ties right into some of the other work as we talk to parents about getting involved with their school districts, right?
Oh, yes.
Are they involved with the elections of school board members, right?
That's right.
Okay,
or running themselves and being on these school
that's
boards.
exactly
I mean,
right.
we
That's
need
it.
to be in places of power.
That's
yes,
it. That's
absolutely.
It. So I think we only have time for one more question. And so Jessica, wherever you are, you get the last question. Jessica's question is, what does partnership look like with your organization? What does that look like?
Well, I love this to end on because we need all the partners we can get. We need to begin to see partnership in ways that aren't necessarily obvious. So one of the ways you can be engaged is to continue to engage with us like you are doing now.
Engage
so
by
Jessica,
engaging.
Engage by engaging. Jessica, you are engaged, and we thank you for that. And all of you who took some time out of your afternoon to be with us today, please keep it up. Please sign up for our newsletter. Please make sure that you check our website early and often, and you pay attention to the things that we're focused on, because if we're focused on it, it means it affects you, and you should be focused on it too. Yeah. And we will try to find ways to make sure that you have a direct way to influence government. We provide the number to the Senate, or here's the person you need to contact, because it's important that it's not just us as an advocacy organization doing this, but that they hear from everyday people, especially if it's local and in your district, or an elected official that is responsible for serving you. So those are some of the ways that you can get engaged. And also, if you're affiliated with an organization and you think that your organization could in some way partner with LDF, or we can leverage each other's strengths and outreach and audience, then let's do that. I can tell you that, and you know this well because you're a Delta, during the election season, we did so much phenomenal work with members of the Divine Nine, which are the traditionally Black fraternity and sorority groups. And it was a phenomenal partnership. They were busy. They were busy. And we could only have the impact that we had, the broad, wide, deep impact, because we partnered with other groups. So if you're affiliated with another group, we worked with Black churches, we worked with so many athletes and others. Please get in touch with us, because we enjoy those partnerships, and we can, iron sharpens iron. We can make each other better by working in partnership.
Yes. All right. Well, what else you want to say before we get out of here?
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Demetria. This was wonderful to be in conversation with you. And, as daunting and dismaying as these times may feel at this moment, I really do believe that we have the capacity and the power to protect ourselves as best we can, and at the same time be building for a better tomorrow. And that is exactly what LDF will be doing day in, day out. We will not stand back. We will not stand down. We will stand up for Black people and for this democracy today and always.
Great. That's good stuff.
Thank
This
you.
has been fun.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Great.
This concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us today and for supporting the Legal Defense Fund. For the latest news, please follow us on social media.